think we're live.
All right. Since you guys have not decided who's going to kick us off, I will do it. It is Thursday, February 20th, and this is a weekly development meeting. Before we get started on the actual agenda, I would like to give everybody who's here a chance to introduce yourselves. So let's start with Nate.
Hey, I'm Nate Lampton. I'm core committer and co-founder. Ta-da.
Tim, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm from the Twin Cities, Minnesota, and here to help out.
Gregory.
Yep, Greg joining from Melbourne, also joining just to help out and get a feel of what's happening in the ECQ.
Jason.
I'm Jason Flatt from Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm a rabble rouser.
Joseph.
I'm Joseph Flatt, also from Las Vegas, and I'm here because I want Backdrop to be better.
And Peter.
Here to talk about my issue I'm advocating for before I head off to bed.
All right, I'm Jen Lampton. I'm here because I want to fix all the things, which is a problem. But let's roll into the meeting agenda. First on here is updates from the project management committee. We have our first real-time meeting next week, which will be exciting. We get to sit down and chat with everybody. I think the primary focus of that meeting is just to talk about how the PMC is working. But hopefully we'll get some good high-level feedback out of there that we can debrief everyone else with after we're done. Contributed project updates. So in the last week, we have one new contributed project. It's multi-select. That's been on my list for a while, so I'm looking forward to using that one. And then Nate, Tim, who wants to take over initiative updates? No one.
Nate, you just were looking at the notes. Could you do it? Sort of summarize what you just did.
Okay, so the past couple of weeks during the same weekly dev meeting, we've been talking about how to decide priorities for long-term large backdrop objectives. And so we're looking at adopting initiatives which are kind of a long timeline, large task, but with a theme objectives. And so we've been hashing out how objectives would actually work, and we'll summarize kind of how initiatives would be created, what they would do. So so first of all, we're still early in this process, and we're still figuring some things out, but here's the general outline of the way things are shaping up. Currently, there's been a forum container created, forum.backdropcms.org, to submit and discuss initiatives. So that's up there already. If you would like to discuss initiatives further, that's a great place to get started. There's no post in there yet. It's a brand new container. But next steps for us are drafting a document on what initiatives actually are. And that document would be kind of official documentation and describing the process for creating initiatives. Some of those things are yet to be decided upon. Once we have that draft document describing what initiatives actually are and the process that it includes, we need the PMC to actually approve this official process change. Once we have this new document, we then promote the initiatives process, probably through a blog post, and then promote that blog post through tweets. Blog post, of course, references the official documentation. And then we start collecting initiatives. So initiatives get posted to the forum. We need to decide when things actually go to vote, but then initiative would go to vote to the PMC, who would then possibly approve the initiative as being official. That actually does not have quotes. It's actually just official. And so once the PMC has approved an initiative, what does that actually mean? So now there is an initiative. What does that actually do? Well, we'd probably create a meta issue to track the initiative, or possibly a project or a tag. We're not actually sure quite yet how we'll keep track of all of the issues that are underneath the larger initiative. And also on backdropcms.org, we're planning on creating a content type to list initiatives, or a page to list initiatives that includes, for each initiative, the team that composes the initiative, its purpose, and its expected timeline of how long the initiative is actually going to run. Initiatives also will be either listed or linked from the main roadmap page, which we already have. And what the initiative actually, what it all means, like why do we even have these initiatives in the first place? The benefits include that the initiative leads get decision-making authority. They just get, assigned basically the authority to guide the overall direction of what that initiative will, what direction it will pursue. Possibly have an assigned core committer that's responsible for reviewing the work that is done within that initiative. Increased publicity around the objective of the initiative, including being listed on the roadmap and having the initiatives page, having a project on GitHub, all of those things. Increased publicity for all of them. And then periodic review during weekly meetings, or at least once per release cycle, we would go through the initiatives and talk about the progress on them. So that's the summary of where we think we're heading with initiatives, and we're continuing to kind of build out that process right now. Do you guys have any questions, or did I miss anything in that overall summary? I know it's kind of a lot to take in, so we have the notes that are associated with this meeting that summarizes all of those things as well.
And I assume one of us will be trying to get like a blog post or something up soon once we to outline all this.
Yeah, I'm not actually sure where the best place for a draft is. Google Doc or some other collaborative editing might be the best place to start.
Sure. To get people to start to, I mean, we're ready for people could start submitting them now, couldn't they? Or do we need to wait until there's something more formal to say?
Yeah, I think they could already start submitting them, but we'll probably need to build out additional details as we even define what the requirements for an initiative are,
So what I'm suggesting is I could do kind of a really high level, simple blog post that just says, this is roughly what the direction we're going. Details are still being fleshed out. Here's where you go to start the discussion. Does that make sense?
That would be even better, like rather than having people like step one before even actually step two, since you already created the forum container. So that was step one. Step one is that we create a blog post that just describes the fact that we're pursuing this in the first place. And then people have a place to reference it. That would be wonderful, Tim.
Okay. It's on my list.
Okay. I added that to the overall approach here as well. Thank you, Tim. So what does this mean for the time being? We've got Backdrop 116 is our next minor release. What do we do for deciding what features and functionality are going to be in 116? Well, we're not going to remove the advocate system that we have right now, where each person or any contributor in the Backdrop community can decide to become an advocate for a particular issue. And advocated issues get priority as far as weekly review, like we mentioned them during these weekly meetings. And that generally makes it so that those issues are given priority and attention and reviewing resources because we're talking about them all the time. So the advocate system, which is currently limited to only advocating for a single issue at a time. So its scope is kind of by nature a little bit smaller and less ambitious. We're going to continue doing that. And for the time being, that's kind of the way that our 116 features are going to be prioritized until these initiatives come fully into their own. I think that's, so anyway, that basically means that our roadmap for 116 at this point is the items that are advocated for. The advocates are usually here in these meetings. And that also means that those issues that are advocated for are some of the leftover ones from 115. So when we get to the 116 update, there'll be a lot of stuff that we had from 116 in there. But our list probably isn't comprehensive yet. If there's things that are missing, then next week, any advocates that are not feeling represented, be sure to join and post your updates to the agendas before the meetings start. So, do you guys have any other questions or things you'd like to add before we go into the just general progress update?
Just I need to flesh out what form these will take on GitHub, as we said. Like, how do we break these down to actionable items? How do we translate the subtasks for initiatives into tickets that can be worked on, and how these get prioritized? So we discussed a couple of ideas last week. We just need to decide. And we don't have to do it right now, but we would need initiatives sort of like to start playing. But if we got an idea of what people think of how we should do it, that would be great.
I just personally feel like some that might be a level of detail that we flesh out as we go get a little further down the road.
Yep. Cool.
Okay. I was on mute and I was saying the opposite thing, but Tim got got there first.
I don't feel strongly about it, Nate. So if you have a different opinion, you think we should flesh it out now? Go ahead.
Well, we don't have a whole lot of things on the remainder of the agenda, honestly. We'll go
then
through
fine.
the status update, and then we don't have any other after talks. So I think how about we finish the updates, because I know like Peter is here just to give his update, and then we talk about it afterwards. Does that sound good?
Sounds like a plan. Yep.
Okay. Great. Okay, so let's do the progress update or progress report. So 115.1 is the next bug fix release of Backdrop. Also, still no real critical things to spur the release of 115.1 right away, but we have a couple of issues that we can discuss. Jen has been working on this issue that there's a fatal error in date module when combined with exposed filters and views. It's issue 4267. It's actually a cross port from date module 777. Currently, well, Jen, can you give us an update on it?
Yeah, so the only reason I wanted to bring this up in this meeting is because this is a fatal problem, but it's also cross port from Drupal 7. And so I wanted to figure out what our general priority of things should be. Like, is it okay if we commit one fix to fixing the fatal error now and then go back and do all of the cross ports of commits to Drupal 7? Or do you want to kind of stick to the process of like, do all the ones that come first, and just kind of figure out our method for handling stuff that's getting attention in Drupal 7 and also in Backdrop?
So I know that this has happened a lot with views already, that when there's something that's actually breaking or even just something that's affecting someone in the Backdrop community, they make an issue just for that thing. And we cross-port it because they made the issue and they submitted a pull request, and so it's ready, so we put it in. And that means that when we go and make those big lists of let's make sure that we got every single patch, then it does take some extra legwork, but the person creating that list or someone subsequently finds the related issue and says, we already applied that fix. Or we had, sometimes what happens is sometimes there's a Backdrop specific approach that isn't a cross port that makes that feature or that patch not apply or not be relevant. And so, yeah, we proceed just, you know, as whatever issues are priority for us, basically. So I'd say that's great that it has its own issue. It's great that it has its own pull request, and we can put it in as soon as possible.
Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, let's see. So we also have this interesting issue that Joseph was telling us about before the meeting started, and it's something that could go in at any time possibly, and that is an issue 4306, which is covering how to make tests faster. Also, PHP unit, question mark? Joseph, can you give us an update on that?
Sure. So I started working on it. There was some discussion before I started about what we could do, and the primary thing that was mentioned was adding a timer, and so I did that. But then I noticed that there were a couple things that seemed like they would be pretty easy to do to make the test faster through the UI. So I've started working on those as well, which is things you actually mentioned in the issue, making the caching work when you're running the test through the UI for the installation profiles, because that was currently only available when you ran them through the command line.
Oh, yeah.
And then also switching the default profile to standard. So it'll have less tables to copy.
I think you actually
when
mean
it's being set
testing
up.
there, or minimal.
Hmm?
So switching it to not standard, right?
Yes, switching it to not standard. So I switched it to testing for the default. And then I've been going through fixing up tests that fail if they don't have the standard profile, because they only, like, if they only depend on one module, I can just add that one module to the setup function, and then, you know, it works. So
Yeah, that's awesome. First of all, but I would worry that change, switching it from standards to testing by default, could make it could take a long time to fix all the tests. So what I might encourage you to do is separate that out into its own thing, and maybe even separate it out into like multiple issues if you want to switch individual tests over.
okay. Well, I
Um,
think I'm almost done with it.
oh, all right. Well, if it takes, maybe put a time box on it, like, a couple of days, and if it takes longer than that, like, I would encourage separating it out, just because these other changes look really awesome. Like, they're really simple. Like, putting a little timer next to each test, like, shows us which tests take long to run and which ones take shorter to run. And the caching thing, I'll elaborate on that for people that aren't familiar. When you run, or when Backdrop CMS, or sorry, when the testing bot that's hosted on ZenCI runs against a pull request, running the tests on the test bot takes like 5 minutes. That's crazy fast. And if you're running it locally, you might notice that it takes more like, well, it could take like an hour if you were running the entire test suite.
So
that's
on my environment, it would get about 1/3 of the way through in 4 hours and then die.
Wow, 4 hours? That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, but your new change, so there's a caching system that's there when you run the testing through the command line, and it doesn't work when you're in the user interface. And it sounds like what you're saying is that you made it so the user interface now uses the same caching system as the command line.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So that's already in the pull request that you've got created?
Mhm.
Wow. That's awesome.
And that, so it took about 4 hours to get 1/3 of the way through and then die. And now the entire thing finishes in about 1 hour.
Oh, it's still a lot slower then versus the command, or versus the
Yeah, so there is a thing that it does in the command line that I wasn't able to get it to do. And that's that it converts all the tables to my ISAM, which is a lot faster for copying. And so that's actually the difference between like 1 hour on my desktop and then 5 minutes on the test bot, is because I can't figure out how to get it to convert the tables on my local environment.
Huh. I'll also add that converting to my ISAM is something that might not work forever. Like the new version of MySQL, for example, or the MySQL 8, I think that my ISAM copy or conversion doesn't work anymore. So it's it's like that's an awesome optimization for now, but it's also not very compatible. So I kind of think like let's put that aside, especially for the user interface, because that my ISAM conversion with the variety of people that are running this locally might not be very reliable in the long term.
Right.
Cool. That is super awesome. So 4306, making tests faster. So it's in progress right now. Probably wouldn't hurt to have a review on it in the meantime. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Joseph. That's awesome. I'm already floored because our tests are already really fast. So making them faster, I mean, yeah, I think that's going to be super.
I've already shaved 2 minutes off the test bot time.
Okay, awesome. So the only concern that I have is that I saw that you removed or maybe I'm not understanding properly, the 2-second waits that we had here and there, but these were there for a good reason. We had failures in the past. So I'm not sure if you're doing anything to accommodate for that. And I didn't leave the PR. So there were some delays of 2 or 3 seconds. Sometimes I think we added as much as 5 seconds for some things that took longer. Like this is from memory. And I saw that you removed those and made them back to 1 second waits. And I'm assuming that there will be failures.
I don't know. It didn't fail on either my local environment or the test bot, so I don't know.
It's also possible, Gregory, like when we were trying to fix some random test failures, we were also kind of shooting in the dark a lot and just kind of adding weights all over the place, hoping that it might fix things. So it might not hurt to revisit some of those,
okay, cool.
or all of them actually.
Right. I think the big one was I think in the batch test there was something like 200 seconds of sleep time.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
I reduced that to about 10 seconds of sleep time, which seems to be working.
Yeah, I didn't notice that, but my objection was basically the 2-second ones in the batch test.module. I think. Oh, it was two. Oh, sorry. Okay, I thought it was 2 seconds. You're right.
Yeah, it has a 2-second timer, but it runs it in a batch like 100 times. So.
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
point of that is to get it so that it always runs at least 2 batch segments. But from my testing, it seemed that about 10 seconds is enough to get it to split it into 2 batch segments.
Yeah.
Okay.
Out of curiosity, Joseph, did you find that the batch tests are running really slowly because it was after you added the timer?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's exactly what we were saying. Like if we knew how long each test took, then we would find the ones that were exceptionally slow. And there you go. Awesome. Yeah. Again, like that's super awesome. All the optimization. But like if we get what we have in, then that allows other people to possibly optimize the tests as well, because they'll also be able to have that increased visibility. So anyway,
yeah,
it's great, but I'd like to make it so that everybody could start working on it together.
Okay.
Maybe I'm just getting greedy that I want it now.
I'll finish up the changes that I have and then stop.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks again, Joseph, and thank you for your update.
Yep.
I don't have anything else for 115.1. Do you guys have anything that has not been added to the agenda? Okay. let's go to 116. So 116 is the next minor release, rolling on as usual here. It will be released May 15th with feature freeze on May 1st. The advocated issues that we have of those represented here, we'll start with BW Pandas issue base/sub install profiles, issue 3174. Peter, can you kind of summarize this and give us the current status?
Yep. So with install profiles currently, each install profile is its own thing. And if, for example, you're a developer that builds all your sites a certain way, like you add an extra module here and there or something, and you want to automate that from the standard profile, you basically have to clone the standard profile and make your own profile based on that with your own changes. So this issue is about making install profiles like theming, where you can have base themes and sub themes. So this makes it so that profiles can define a base profile, and then the base profile will run first, do all its stuff, and then your profile, the sub profile, will then run and do its stuff. Unlike theming, where you can tell a sub theme to override certain base theme things like CSS or whatever, this pull request for install profiles is just simply run one install profile, then run the next one. If you want to override anything, you can just do it in PHP code, like manually uninstall modules that may be the base profile installed that you don't want. Maybe down the track we can add in some other sort of overriding features, but this is currently just allowing you to create an install profile that runs another one first and then runs yours, just to make it simply easier to create profiles that do most of what something else does, but just without having to clone it or copy it, sort of thing. And the current status is that there's a pull request that some people have tried and says works for them. I've made a few extra changes and tweaks that need some more further reviewing, but basically it's ready for testing and review by anyone that wants to do so.
Okay. So it sounds basically like inheritance of profiles, the same way that things work, right?
Yeah. So, for example, I created a install profile for the backdrop challenge puzzle thing that I made last month for their birthday, and because this is not available yet, I had to clone the standard install profile and then make my changes to that. Whereas once this gets in, it'll just be a matter of putting base profile equals standard in my profile, and then it does all that stuff and it inherits all that, like it basically runs all that stuff first, installs all the modules, sets up the user account, etc., and then your install profile can do its thing based on what's already there in the standard one.
Cool. Yeah, the issue over in 3174. This is actually the first I've heard of it. Looks like other people have kind of weighed in on the value proposition here, and I'm going to say I'm going to have to read that issue. But I see the other people are like, I'm not sure about this, and then later they're like, oh yeah, that seems like that's legit. So I'm going to put myself in that camp as well of like, let's take a look and read over it.
Yeah, I think it's like initially, I think a lot of people don't use install profiles, don't like install profiles. It probably doesn't matter much, but I think if we can do more of this type of thing to make it more automated, then I think install profiles could eventually become something like a recipe where you can build sites more automatically and stuff like that.
Great. Yeah, so it currently needs review. Awesome. Great work putting it together. Okay. Next up, Better Workflow States, issue 1475. This is an issue that Dr. Wilmot has been working on. I think he's the official. Oh, do we have an advocate for this, actually? Or is it just something that it's just been worked on a whole lot?
I think that Dr. Wilmot sort of revived it. So we had a lot of discussions, and at some point, we discussed this last week, actually, and there was some confusion around how people expected it to work or what people were expecting out of it. But I think that we sort of we have sort of like reached the conclusion now that we have a rough idea how this should work. We just need to flesh it out, and it needs a lot of testing. That's the thing. I meant to test it, and Doc Wilmot has repeatedly requested for a review. Each time that I started, I would get down a rabbit hole because it touches on a lot of things and how things should work from UI UX perspective, so that it's not confusing. So yeah, just
I think we also had a really in-depth conversation last week, and maybe it will be good to document exactly what we got to the end of. At the end of that conversation, there was a lot of confusion over terminology because we have weird things that
current
happen in
revision.
that issue that we haven't ever run into before, and everybody had like different like internal names for it. And then when we tried to like talk, and I think that's a lot of what's happening in the issue queue, where it's like, what do you mean by active? What do you mean by current? What do you mean by published? And it's all different for revisions than it is for nodes. And so it's really hard to have that conversation. So I think it would be good if we could figure out some way to do a new issue summary that's like, this is what we're expecting. And then, because Doc Wilmot's like, it's no point in fixing bugs if I don't even know what I'm building in the first place. So I think like just documenting what we're expecting first will help anyone who goes to test it and be like, does the thing we're testing match what our expectations are? And I had intended to write up that comment last week and didn't get to it. So I will try and do that today. I have opened the tab. I will start.
Sure. Let me just, I had a similar thought that we really needed to do that. I was hoping somebody else would, but thinking I would try if no one else did, and I haven't had time. I was personally, if I did it, I was thinking about opening a Google Doc and just like redrafting the problem, where our current status is, so that other people could, make comments on it before I posted it into the issue. So I might recommend you try that too.
Okay, I'll try that. And then if I send you the Google Doc, will you review it before I post it in the issue? Okay, Gregory can give you to it. Okay, fantastic. Then we'll at least make sure 3 of us are on the same page.
Right.
Before we involve everyone else too.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the confusion was around what the current or active or whatever we call it. And from our discussion, it pretty much sounded that we sort of like all agreed on certain things, like the published thing is a state that reflects on the actual node, not on the revisions. So if we put that, it sounded at that time when we were discussing that if we actually put that down in words, it would actually be a pseudocode of what we want it to work like.
Yeah. So maybe I should start at the very top with like a glossary of terms where I'm like, when I use this word, I'm only referring to X. And then that way, if we decide to change that word, it will know exactly what it applies to and where.
Yep.
So, okay.
Yep.
Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. Gregory here, actually the advocate for the next issue.
Yeah.
Text
So it was
formats.
meant. Yeah, sorry, this has been delayed a lot of times. So I was meant to get it in 114 and then 115. I think that the last update is that Doc Wilmot just jumped in and made a pull request for it, which is based off of Jen's last pull request. So just needs to be reviewed and tested. The problem there was that we had it working, but it broke the way that filters work in CK Editor. So we need to make sure that this doesn't happen this time.
Yep, that's my thought on it too. Is it just seems to be fixed currently, so we just need some eyeballs on it. Let's see. Next up, Jen, your issue 4031.
No updates.
Okay. Is it at this point worth looking at that and deciding if that's something we want to continue?
Yeah, I think I was thinking it wouldn't be a 116 milestone if we had initiatives instead. But since it sounds like we're not going to have initiatives for this time, I will continue to advocate for it for the next release and see if I can put my focus there. And then when we do have initiatives, I'll probably remove my focus. So if it doesn't get in the next release, I'm happy to let it go.
Okay. Great. Let's see. My next up is my issue, issue 1992, which is digital signatures on packages. This has been stuck for quite a while. I asked you, Jen, that question because I'm thinking about it myself for this, and that we've been churning a lot on this issue, and we have been making some progress, but I also have a lot of other irons in the fire that are kind of more interesting and immediate issues. Also, just in general, the automatic updates. I can't really use the word initiative because that has special meaning now, but automatic updates efforts have some other things that are possibly even more high priority than this, that I think it would be worth taking a step back and looking at the overall priorities of automatic updates and what it is that we can do to help facilitate that. Just in general, what's also happening out there in the world, the Drupal contrib version of automatic updates, which apparently works for Drupal 7 and Drupal 8, has an official release now as actually being functional. I still don't really know what it looks like for Drupal core. It's not really relevant for us though, but the point is that we have a Drupal 7 module and an entire approach that is working and out there in production like systems, and that it would be worth taking a look at that and seeing what it is that we can learn from that implementation over there. So obviously they're working with the infrastructure that Drupal already has, or maybe they made their own infrastructure that works better. I'm not entirely sure, because there seems like there's some things that we're having to do on our infrastructure side to make this better and more secure. And I kind of wonder if they've had to do something similar. So anyway, that is all to say, issue 1992, no updates on this. But yeah, I'd like myself to take a look at reconsidering if that's my priority for 116. Ta-da! So that's it. Do you guys have anything else you guys would like to discuss today before we end the meeting?
Yeah, so Peter has provided a pull request that is meant to fix the tugboat setup that we have so that it we can install contrib modules in it that we have a project browser.
Oh, okay, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I tried to fix that a while back, and it wasn't trivial, or I was running into some problems. So
It wasn't.
Is that in the tugboat QA, or in the backdrop tugboat?
Yes,
project?
it should be. It should be that.
Okay.
I'll try to flick a link your way or add it to the agenda here. So it was a one-line change, changing Dockered to tugboat root, actually. And
Okay.
yeah, Peter mentioned that it was like reading the documentation, you were meant to do the opposite, but it has worked in his testing. So if it works, it works.
Okay. We also had the how to surface initiatives. I forgot to write that down, so I almost forgot about it. But
What's that?
we earlier in the meeting we talked about initiatives and the way that they should be represented in GitHub. And if we want to discuss that, we can do that now.
Yeah. Before we move on, just on the tugboat subject, when we initially launched the tugboat demos, I asked a couple of colleagues in the agency I work for to just test it. One of the senior engineers, as a joke, said, "What? It has the installer. You lost me." So we had some discussions about either removing the installer step, or if people want to test the installer bit, then we have some sort of checkbox or a separate tugboat that does that. And as far as I know, Simply Test Me used to do the same thing. So you would run it, and then you end up with something that was admin and admin for password, and that would be all. I don't know what your feelings are with that.
I think that would be great. We did it the way that it is right now, mostly for maintenance issues, that if we imported a database, then we would need to maintain the database dump. Like every release, we'd need to make a new database dump, which maybe that's not a whole lot of work, but maybe it is. But I definitely think it would be better if you were able to log in and you didn't need to run through the installer.
Yeah.
So how difficult is that? fix that. And can anybody other than you do that, Nate?
I think Peter has worked on it, so yeah.
Yeah, so the method for testing this, if you're not in the DevOps group, if you're in the DevOps group, the password manager has access to Tugboat in it, and you can actually log into it. But you also need commit access to the Backdrop Ops Tugboat group. Anyway, if you don't have any of those things, the way that I did it initially is make your own fork of it, create a Tugboat account, and then point your repository at your new Tugboat account. And then you can test making Backdrop installs through Tugboat. And the Tugboat user interface has a button for like create sandbox. And that's basically what the demo button on backdropcms.org is doing, is it's using Tugboat's API to essentially click that button for you. So if you're using the Tugboat user interface, you can create a Tugboat instance off of any repository on GitHub that contains a Tugboat YAML file or Tugboat config directory.
Are you saying that our Tugboat account also works on any forks off of the repo that we pointed it to?
Yeah, if you fork the repository and then you in your personal Tugboat account point Tugboat at your fork, then it will work. Yeah. Because there's nothing, Tugboat doesn't really care where the repository is. It just needs a Git URL, and then it'll run from there.
Okay. So yeah, there was a related issue, and then we jumped to the GitHub thing where we discussed about allowing. We got the contrib modules working as in the Tugboat, or it seems like that. But then Tim mentioned that one of the initial goals was to allow people to easily test contrib modules without having to go through the project installer the same way that Simply Testing does, as in select the module when you start and then do it that way, like launch the sandbox with the Tugboat sandbox with the module installed. I'm not sure. That sounds a little bit more complicated than it might not be, but yeah.
Yeah, we would need, so if we just want to run down that, Tugboat, as far as I know, doesn't have any way of like passing parameters to it saying like do some, like add this option to it when you build the sandbox. You do have all of these scripting options so that when the Tugboat like container spins up, you can run any commands you want on it, including like you can run drush and download modules, and you can import the database, and you can do all of these things before the Tugboat container then gets turned over to the user and says, here's your Tugboat URL. But the kind of problem I had, at least, is that you can point it at a repository, and the repository contains the scripting, but you can't actually tell it like also install these modules. And so what that means is that you need to have something beforehand that runs scripting, like, and sets up a new repository or sets up where the parameters come from. Now that I think about it, that could be key. That like if you could put the parameters somewhere and then Tugboat could ask, what are my parameters, then that would work. But you're right that it makes it more complicated, just in that there needs to be something that is persistent that says like, here's the parameters for the new Tugboat instance that are going to be set up. So that just means that it needs to have some kind of persistent storage. And right now we have what we have on backdropcms.org is that it's like, it doesn't know hardly anything. It doesn't store any database tables or do anything. It just says, here's the Tugboat sandbox. And once you leave that page, like it can never show you that information again because it's not in any way persistent.
So the way that Simply Test Me worked, it would add parameters in the URL. So if we had a way that we add the parameters in the button that we click, and that persists, if these parameters, are passed on to the installer, like the Drupal installer, sorry, the Backdrop installer, then maybe, but that sounds that we need to do work on the Backdrop, the product itself, to accept parameters on the installer of what to do after the installation is, so it sounds a bit more complicated. And yeah, I would prefer it if we had an info message showing up and saying if you want to install more things, and have a link so that it can take them to the project installer. This sounds a lot less work.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we have all of like I think first thing we need to do is make it so Backdrop's actually installed rather than needing to run
Yeah.
through the installer. And that might mean that we like install Backdrop. Well, Backdrop has its install shell script, which would be the easiest way to do that. But longer term, we could use the Drush extension and use Drush to install Backdrop, and then use Drush to download the modules. And that would yeah, all work towards the same goal.
Yep, sounds like it. Anyway, we have discussed this about it. Let's focus. I'll get the link for that PR that Peter has filed to you for you to review, and then what we just discussed sounds a little bit more complicated. So maybe we'll put it on the site for now, or maybe one of us can test it out when they have time, and maybe let's discuss now. Oh, actually, we're over time now. This was important. This was important though. We needed to, yeah.
Okay. Well, let's postpone that how to surface initiatives, like how we organize them and stuff like that, because we're a long way from actually approving any initiative at this point. So yeah, let's postpone that, table it, and end. So thank you guys all for joining today. It was a great meeting, and yeah, I'm excited to see initiatives shaping up and having some kind of process around that. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
I'm going to end the meeting, but if you guys want to stick around, I have a question for you afterwards.
Nate, I also have a question for Nate. So.
Okay.
Okay, let's end.